How's it going, everyone? Welcome into the South to Central Florida Sports Report. I'm your host, Ken Landis. Glad you can join us on this Thursday, November 8th, 2018, for the inaugural edition of the South to Central Florida Sports Report podcast. I started it as a YouTube channel back in about February and decided to continue it on the growing world of podcasts. So whether you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, or indeed still on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate the listeners and looking forward to starting a great journey with you all. First, a little bit about me and why I decided to start this podcast. I'm a Boca Raton native, so I grew up loving the Marlins, the Heat, the Panthers, and the Dolphins. Now I'm a UCF student, about to graduate in December. That's some pretty scary stuff right there. Now a die-hard Knight fan and fighting hard for the recognition that I believe they deserve, and I'm sure a lot of other UCF students do as well. But how I got here is quite a story. I was a civil engineering major, and that kind of dropped off very quickly. And I switched to an ad PR major, so now I'm a marketing junkie. And I also picked up a sports business minor, and that's how I got here. I got an internship through that minor with the Florida Fire Frogs, a single-A affiliate of the Atlanta Braves, and I started on the field. I was a promotionals intern. I got fans to play games on the field and look stupid riding inflatable ponies, but that was always good fun and a good laugh. But eventually I said, hey, my dream is to be a sports broadcaster, and I went up to the Fire Frogs play-by-play guy, Ted Cruz, great guy, and he gave me a shot. He gave me 3 games on at the end of the season, and I got to learn from him and learn with him, and I realized that was really nerve-wracking doing that, but I wanted to just do it over and over and over again. So from there I went on to broadcast with the UCF Knights, got to meet Mark Daniels, the main guy here at UCF, and he hooked me up with the broadcasting internship program, got to do the UCF baseball season, some non-conference games earlier in 2018, and since then I've moved on to become the primary play-by-play guy for the UCF volleyball team, which has been a heck of a ride. We'll get to more of them in a second, but that's where I am now, and I stand here doing this podcast with you just to keep my voice fresh, to get it out there in the world, and to hopefully improve my whole broadcasting thing. So I hope that you listening at home can critique me, be as brutally honest as you want, say my voice sucks or something, or if I'm doing a great job, I'd also love to hear that from you guys. But I eventually want to make it as a play-by-play announcer, maybe even for the Miami Marlins. We'll see where life takes me. But that's the end goal, so this is just a way for me to keep practicing and keep improving my game. And with that, let's go ahead and just dive straight in to today's episode so you can get a little taste of what this podcast is all about. We are going to hit on all 5 of my teams that I mentioned, but we'll do it kind of quickly on some of them, and others will take a little more time, like this one. So we'll open up with the UCF Knights, and not just the UCF football Knights, but we have a top 25 program going strong now. Danny White, the athletic director here at UCF, mentioned when he first got here he wanted to create a top 25 program all around, and if you look around the fall sports right now, he's done a very good job of ensuring this happening, whether it's having the right coaches in place or, whatever. But we'll start with the soccer pitch. I mean, you look at men's soccer, they're ranked number 7 in the nation right now. They won the American Athletic Conference in the regular season and are looking to extend that crown to a championship, a tournament run. They're the number 1 seed in that. They're hosting it here. So if you're in the area, it's a big weekend in UCF sports. You've got soccer tonight, and then if they win tonight, they've got a game Saturday as well as football on Saturday. And then you've also got UCF volleyball on Friday and Sunday. I'll be on the call for those. So a jam-packed weekend of UCF sports. And before I move on to the women's volleyball, we'll talk about women's soccer, who have also been tearing it up. They didn't win the conference tournament, but they still had a heck of a good year and arguably really add to that top 25 program. But speaking of a 25 program, volleyball is ranked for the first time ever. They are finally ranked for the first time. They cracked in the rankings, I think it was 3 weeks ago, they at number 25. Then they bumped up to 23. This week they check in at number 22 and face off against the Cincinnati Bearcats this Friday. It's free admission, actually, so if you're in the area, you should really be living on UCF's campus for the next 4 days. That team is absolutely tearing it up, and it's funny because this team was not supposed to be this good. They have one senior, that's Jordan Libero. Jordan Pingle. She's the libero for the team. She's won the American Athletic Conference Defensive Player of the Week 4 times already. and that's the only senior. There's 2 juniors and a whole lot of freshmen that are bringing a bunch of talent. One of those being McKenna Melville. We call her Mac Attack around the gym there in the venue, and she has just been on fire. She's won a bunch of awards as well so far, and this team is giving the football team a run for their money on their win streak. They're looking for number 20 this weekend, and they could match it. Well, they wouldn't be able to match it if UCF wins on Saturday, the football team, but they could reach 21 consecutive victories if the Knights win out this home weekend. And they are poised to win the conference, which means they get a free pass into the tournament. That will be the first time the volleyball Knights will go dancing since 2014. So that's something to look out for sure. But now that we are talking about these top 25 programs, we'll get more into the football thing. And oh man, how much more disrespect can ESPN and everyone salt on us? It's becoming quite a joke at this point, and it's becoming more and more clear that I don't think that UCF is going to get a playoff spot whether we win out or not. And even if we win out next season at this point, I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm looking at all 3 polls side by side right now. I've got the college football playoff, the AP poll, and the coaches poll. All of the top 6 are unanimous, but after that, everything blows up in your face. There's so many places I could start to just expose how fraudulent this college football playoff garbage really is. And I'll get through the rankings first, but then I'm going to explain the real reason behind it and why they look the way they do. And unfortunately, it all comes back to the money. And I'm sure if you're all over Twitter, you've heard this already. You've heard some of this, but I hope to provide a little more insight to that. But let's go ahead and let's see. Let's pick a team. Let's go ahead and see why Auburn is in the top 25 in the college football playoff, but 27th in the AP and coaches poll. And if you look at Auburn's schedule, it's literally just because of who they play. And I think it's just they're boosting other teams' schedules at this point. Like, it gives Alabama another top 25 win, stuff like that. And Washington conveniently is ranked right behind Auburn because Auburn and Washington played to open up the season, and that makes their schedule look better. Washington is in the other polls actually a little bit higher, but a couple of the other teams I want to hit on here before we move on is Iowa. Iowa's the big one for me. If you look at Iowa, they are now number 21 in the college football playoff rankings. If you go look at the AP poll, they're 32nd. They're not even in the top 30. They're below that 30 mark. And in the coaches poll, they're 28th. They have no business being there. Let's go through their schedule. I have it pulled up right here. They beat Northern Illinois. Great. That's not a good win. They beat Iowa State 13-3. We're going to get to Iowa State in a second, too. Iowa beating Northern Iowa 38-14. They're nobody. Wisconsin beats Iowa, and Wisconsin's terrible now. Then you have Iowa beating Minnesota at Minnesota. Okay, that's okay, I guess. Then you have Iowa beating Indiana. Then you have Iowa shutting out Maryland. And then there's this first-ranked matchup right here when they're both ranked. It's Penn State defeating Iowa when Penn State was 17 and Iowa was 18. And then somehow after that loss, they jump up to 16, and they lose to Purdue, now sitting at 21. Their remaining schedule, they have Northwestern, Illinois, and Nebraska. That's a real fun schedule for you right there. That's 3 easy wins, and a team that has no business being ranked right now. I mean, can you point to me 3 reasons in that schedule why they should be ranked? Besides, they lost to Wisconsin, and go ahead, give them a quality L right there, and a quality L to Penn State. But who have they beat? They haven't beat anybody that's really noteworthy. I just don't get that. And with Iowa, now we're going to move to Iowa State, who checks in right behind Iowa in the rankings. And as mentioned, Iowa State played Iowa. That was Iowa State's first game where they lost. Then they hung around with Oklahoma, lost by 10. Beat the Akron Zips, who cares. Lost to TCU, who's having a not good year. They beat Oklahoma State, 25th at the time, by 6. They beat West Virginia pretty badly at home. So I give Iowa State a lot of credit. They've had a lot of tough opponents so far. But at the end of the day, it's another 3-loss team that's taken a spot away from a 1-loss Cincinnati or something along those lines. So to cap off this whole schedule thing, Kentucky real quick. Kentucky should not be ranked in front of UCF, but hang on one sec. Going back to Iowa State, their schedule remaining is Baylor, Texas, another ranked team, Kansas State at Incarnate Word. I don't know what school that is, but that's the rest of their schedule. It's a cupcake walk except for Texas. Baylor might give them some trouble, but at the end of the season, this team is going to be ranked, and it's debatable that they even should be there. Real quick on Kentucky, you've heard the arguments all over Twitter, and I'm right there with you all. It's these stupid quality SEC losses, but even then, if you look at that stupid eye test thing they talk about all the time, Kentucky needed an untimed down in Missouri to win by 1 point, and that sparked a bunch of controversy, how UCF traveled to Memphis and won by 1 point, and how everyone was talking bad about that, and then everyone was like, oh, Kentucky's a great team, they just beat Missouri by a point, and then they struggled at home against Vanderbilt the week before that. So I don't think they should be above us. I think if you were to ask me, and I do this pretty much every week, I rank the teams through my own eyes, and I have UCF up around 6. I mean, it's with Oklahoma struggling last week, that's what at least had me pole vaulting UCF over Oklahoma. But I'll release those on our Twitter page. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, actually. That would be a really good thing for you to do. That's where I'll be releasing all the podcast updates, YouTube stuff, all that good stuff. You can find our Twitter handle. Go ahead and type it in. It's SO2CENFL Sports. So it's the first 2 letters of South, then the number 2, CEN for Central Florida Sports. So, or you can just search it. I'm sure you'll find it eventually. But there's our Twitter handle. But all of this, like, I could keep going through this. I have a bunch of graphics here. I have Michigan's remaining schedule. I have Georgia's remaining schedule. I have Oklahoma's remaining, and I have LSU. LSU should not be ranked above us either with those 2 quality SEC losses. But if you look at the remainder of these schedules, all of these teams could arguably win out and leave UCF out. We would need chaos in the top 10 to even move up into that 7 or 6 range. And at this point, I think we deserve it, but I just don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. Now, here's the sad reason why it won't happen, and what I believe to be the absolutely 100% true reason why we won't get to the college football playoff. And unfortunately, it has to do with money. The good old American dollar coming back to bite Knights in the butt. Trust me, I hate it as much as you do. But when we look at it, you can Google this. You can find this too. I'm not just making this stuff up. For the college football playoff, any team that makes it gets a $6 million bonus sent to their conference. So when you take a look at last year's team, you got Bama, you got Georgia, you got Clemson, and you got Oklahoma. Each of those conferences gained $6 million, except for the SEC, who gained $12 million because they had 2 teams in the college football playoff. And that's why the SEC is so adamant about having those 2 teams in there, whether they deserve it or not. And that is a big reason why this is so important. And God forbid a group of 5 team gets in there and steals that $6 million from the already heavily wealthy teams in the Power 5. Now, why are these teams heavily wealthy? That's another good question that you might be asking. And it's because of these things called TV deals. TV deals are pretty much, what they sound like. It's ESPN negotiating with the conference to have exclusive rights to televising their games and whatnot. The current deals in place pay out these conferences this amount for each team, pretty much. So in general, the SEC collects nearly $600 million in revenue just from those TV deals. Of those $600 million, you divide that by every team in the SEC, and you get about $41 million per team. Next up is the Big Ten at $34.8 alongside the Big 12. They make about the same. The Pac-12, $29 million per team, and then the ACC rounds it out with $27. Now, you look at the American Conference, the Power 6 conference, but doesn't jump into the Power 5. They only make $74 million in total revenue. So they have to split that $74 million between every single team in the conference. That right there is the problem, ladies and gentlemen. The American Conference gets nowhere near the amount of money that a Power 5 conference would, and that affects everything all the way down to recruiting. If you take what the Power 5 could spend, they could spend about $100,000 per student athlete. So however many recruits they go, maybe they get 25 recruits. They spend all that money. They spend $2.5 million on that. And then the group of five, when you look at the group of five, if you take a look at Conference USA, they can spend $76,000 per their entire recruiting class. That's not even for each athlete. So there you see how and why there's such a gap in the minds of these brainless people that criticize the Knights, say, oh, they can't dance with the SEC. They just think it's all about the money. And unfortunately, that's what it is. And until college football playoff changes that, it will remain this way for quite some time. As for the rankings and everything, that is just a byproduct of the fraud system that they have in place that is simply centered around money. But we will forget about that for now. We've already seen the rankings and how stupid they can be with Ohio State, a 2-loss team that struggled and only have 1 winning record on their resume, and now the Knights have 3. But you've seen these arguments on Twitter. You've seen them on ESPN, and I'm sure you guys don't want to listen to any more of that, so I will save your ears, and we will move on from the UCF Knights Kingdom, and we're going to go back down south, and we're going to head all the way south to the BB&T Center with the Florida Panthers, who have had a less than stellar start to their season. They started 0-2-2, which matched their worst start since 2000 and the 2001 season. Little fun fact for you about that season, they ended up finishing with just 66 points. That's when ties were still around. They went 22, 38, and 9 overtime losses with 13 ties. Somehow they weren't last in the division. They were third in the Southeast Division, but they were 12th in the conference. And mind you, this is when the Atlanta Thrashers were still a thing. The leading scorer for that team, Pavel Bure, with 59 goals and 92 points. And you look at how lopsided that season was. The next leading goal getter was Viktor Kozlov with just 14. That's a huge gap. That's 45 goals and 37 points total for Kozlov. He was second in both of those. Bure played on all 82 games, though, while Kozlov played in only 51. So the Panthers are coming off that Finland series where they split with the Jets, and they now sit at 3-5-3. They're not really in the best spot in the standings, well, considering they're last, but they have 4 games in hand, pretty much on everyone in the division. They've had a whole week off, so they haven't lost a game in 7 days. The Knights haven't lost a game in 680-something, but we already passed that. But the Panthers this week, they play the Oilers tonight, then they play the Islanders and the Senators at home. Those are 3 must-win games at this point in the season. The Panthers have been starting super slow these past couple years, and it's come back to bite them in the end. You saw last year they missed it by a point. Literally, I could go through the first couple games we've had and point out, hey, we could have grabbed a point there, and that could honestly end up hurting us in the end of the season. So these early games are important. Luongo's finally back, and I'm glad he's back because, well, he's Luongo. But after that, and this is something that's always been irking me about the Panthers, is that it's not their fault either. The scheduling just ends up being pretty crappy sometimes. They seem to play most of their games away from home on long road trips, and then they end up coming back and playing a home or a doubleheader, a back-to-back, something like that. And here, as you see, they just went to Finland. They come home for 3 games, and then they go back on the road for the Flyers, the Blue Jackets, the Rangers, the Senators, the Lightning, all on the road. Those are some shaky games. The Senators aren't who I thought they would be, honestly, worse. They have been okay, and we have to face the Lightning on the end of that tough road trip, and it just might not be a very good time near the end of that. But hopefully the Panthers keep it rolling on their 25th season. We're going to keep an eye on them as things go. Right now, their playoff percentage is not the best. I like to watch that. If you tuned into my YouTube channel previously, I would normally always try and keep tabs on that. But right now, the Panthers sitting around a 20% chance of making the playoffs. It's a lot better than what the Kings are sitting at, though, I can tell you that much. So moving on from the ice to the gridiron, as the Miami Dolphins, they are 5-4 on the season, which is a decent spot to be without your starting quarterback and having Brock Osweiler in as the backup. And he's been doing okay so far, but nothing super stellar from the Miami Dolphins. They just barely scraped by the Jets. Their only touchdown coming on defense on a pick 6. I'm hitting the panic button on this team. I think the rest of the season from here on out is going to be very bad. And here's why. If you look at the schedule. So first of all, you don't know what's going on with Tannehill. I mean, you might have an idea, but his shoulder or his leg, or it's always something with this guy. And to look at their schedule the rest of the way, you've got the Packers this week on Veterans Day weekend, and they're in Lambeau, and they're already a 10-point underdog. And we'll get to some of these number lines in a minute after the NFL segment is over here. But they've got the Packers, they've got the Colts, who are at 3-5, but they are honestly one of the scariest 3-5 teams I've ever seen. They actually have a much better defense than anyone has thought, and Andrew Luck is picking up right where he left off before he kept getting injured. And then you've got the Bills, the Patriots, the Vikings, the Jaguars, and the Bills again to round out the year. I'm hoping we can get those 2 Bills wins, but it seems every time we go to Buffalo, something stupid happens. But let's just say, even for the sake of that, we'll give the Dolphins 2 wins against the Bills, a loss against the Packers, a loss against the Colts. That puts us at 7-6 right now. You got the Patriots at 7-7, and I feel like these Vikings and Jaguars games are toss-ups, but at the worst, you could see the Dolphins making it at the end of the season with a 7-9 record. That's not going to get them to the playoffs. But speaking of playoffs, right now the Dolphins, if they can get their act together, they're within striking distance. They are 7th, and that's the first team out of the AFC playoff picture right now, just because Cincinnati had their bye week. Cincinnati's 5-3. Miami 5-4. Obviously, the Bengals hold that tiebreaker, though, as they beat the Dolphins. But I don't think this team is going to get there the way they've been playing, the whole situation with Tannehill. And I'm not trying to blame Adam Gase or anything, but it's just a pile of – it's just a mess, guys. It's quite the situation down in South Florida right now. And until something gets shaken up, this team is not going to be a legitimate contender. But there is hope. As mentioned, they're 5-4, sitting in a playoff spot right now. They're right on the edge of it, and we'll see if they can end up getting there or not. So you heard me touch on the number that the Dolphins are an underdog by. They're an underdog by 10 so far. And with the whole sports betting thing becoming somewhat legal in somewhat states, I've taken notice to it. I've been following it, and a lot of people are doing it on their sports talk shows and stuff like that. I've noticed Colin Cowherd doing it. I've noticed Scott Van Pelt and his man Stanford Steve doing it. So I've started paying attention to it. I haven't been using money. I've been just kind of following along with it. As I've done that, I've actually started to enjoy it and really started to get into it and have a decent success at it, just looking at everything. But I started listening to Stanford Steve and the Bear, their podcast, and they are on fire with these college football picks. And that's really where I've been focusing most, pretty much just because, it's hard to be satisfied when UCF is kicking everybody's butt and not moving up the rankings. So I obviously want to get into the college football spirit a little bit more. But if you look at it, Stanford Steve's record is 35-13-1, and Bear is 36-25-1. Together, they're 71-38-2, which is pretty crazy because in sports betting, apparently you're only supposed to win 55% of the time. That's a lot higher than 55%. So I figured on this show I'd just have a little bit of a segment to kind of give a nod to that and give some picks for the week, stuff like that. Don't know what to call it yet. Maybe we can call it Let's Get This Bread, as the kids say.
Good evening, fellas. Let's get this bread.
But that trend might die out pretty quickly, so maybe we'll think of something along the way. Hopefully you can give me some feedback on that. Here is the picks that they have for the week, and I'm not going to give out all their picks because obviously I want you to go look at their podcast as well, but here are the ones that I particularly liked that they had, especially from Stanford Steve, and one of them's coming from the American, and it's that Cincinnati game against USF. USF goes into Cincinnati, where Cincinnati is going to be a 14-point favorite, and supposedly it's supposed to be 22 degrees in Cincinnati on that day, so I don't think USF, with the way they've been playing after they got rolled by the green wave of Tulane, that I don't think they stand a chance. Another one that I like, that both of them like, is the Ohio State line, 3.5 over Michigan State. This one is in Michigan State, but it's at noon, so there's not really too much primetime craziness going on there. And as much as I really would love to see Ohio State lose, it's probably not going to happen. Ohio State's getting their favorite by 3.5 points. So if you take Michigan State, you can either have them win the game or lose it by 3. And if they lose it by 4, then you're out of luck. They have other ones. They have one about Notre Dame here, and their whole quarterback situation just got shaken up, but it should be okay. Another one on there, an interesting one, is the Penn State over Wisconsin. Penn State's favored by 9. I don't think Wisconsin can even stay in the ballpark with them. I think they'll get blown away. But since this is a podcast relating to the Knights, let's just go ahead and stick in that American Conference. If you were to, let's say, put money on each of those games, and here they are. Here are the games this week. Obviously, Navy comes to UCF. This number is absolutely atrocious. 25.5 the Knights are supposed to win by. They're supposed to win by over almost 4 scores. That's going to be hard to come by. The over for this game is set at 63.5, which is interesting because the Knights in their winning streak, their 21-game winning streak, have not scored under 30 points. So there's 30 points right there. When you look at Navy in their last 4 games, the last 3, they've given up over 40, with one of them 49, so almost 50. So if you want to say the Knights score 50, that means you just need Navy to score 2 touchdowns against the Knights, which is very possible. So if you want to go for the over on this game, I'd do that, but I would probably stay away from that spread just because that's a big spread. Moving on, SMU UConn, just going to hit these off real quick. SMU is favored by 19.5. I would probably take that SMU line. UConn has been atrocious all season, but somehow they kept it close to the Bulls, but that's a whole nother story. Tulsa visits Memphis. Memphis is a favorite by 15.5. That probably makes sense. ECU Tulane. Tulane's favored by 12. I might actually lean ECU on that one. I don't know how Tulane can keep that up, that win after the Bulls. Obviously, they look dominant, but that was something else. Moving on, we already mentioned the USF Cincinnati game. Cincinnati's favored by 2 touchdowns. I would take that number probably even if it was at 21. Temple and Houston. Houston's favored by 4.5. This is actually one that they did hit on in their podcast. And Houston's favored by 4.5. Temple visits Houston. And I think that Houston could actually be a good pick here. And we hope they're a good pick because if the Knights are going to play them in the conference championship game, then I think this is an important game there. So that's the look around the American Athletic Conference lines. Just to give you a little bit of background on how I've done so far this season in NCAA football, I'm 35-24. So that's a decent winning mark. I've tried some parlays, and those don't really end well. I'm 2-9 in those. So stay away from the parlays. Just go with the straight picks. This past week, I started out 6-0, which was really awesome. Using a couple different methods. I jumped on the bandwagon of the half spreads. So that's like the spread at halftime or the spread even after the first quarter. So Clemson, in their game last week, or I think it was 2 weeks ago now, they were favored by 7.5 after the first quarter. That was an easy hit there. Louisville and Clemson, that was the game. It was Louisville-Clemson. Having over 14 in the first quarter, they hit that easily. Then I had Baylor plus 7, Iowa State minus 14.5, and the Memphis-East Carolina game going well over. That happened. And an Air Force Army game with the under of 42.5. But as mentioned, I just like to keep an eye on these. These are kind of fun for me. It's cool to see the bad beats and all that stuff. So I really do enjoy the segment of SVP and Stanford Steve. That's every Monday after Monday Night Football. So if you ever want to hear what they're all about, go ahead and look into that. So that's all for that segment. Let's get this bread, people.
I have obtained the bread, but at what cost?
As promised, we're going to round out the show with the last 2 teams of those 5 I mentioned to you. And these are going to be a little bit quicker. As the Heat season just getting in swing, they are sitting at 5-5, which is not bad at all. And they're actually only sitting a game out of 3rd place. They're tied for 7th in the conference. and 6-4 Celtics are sitting at that 3rd seed. And one of the big question marks I had coming into the season was Hassan Whiteside, and last night he was nothing short of an explanation point, as he went for 29 points, 20 rebounds, and 9 blocks, just one shy of a triple-double. That is a number that the Heat need to see from him consistently. It seemed like towards the end of last year, it just seemed like he was not really himself. And I'm a big believer that he might have just gotten paid and just been like, okay, I'm going to go through the motions now and stuff like that. But last night, he didn't quite look like that. He looked like the potential all-star, maybe even Hall of Famer that the Heat saw in him originally before they paid him the big bucks. So I'm looking to see more of that from Whiteside. My friend group and I had been going back and forth all offseason. Hey, we're going to trade Whiteside. What are we doing? Are we getting Jimmy Butler? All this stuff. But I think for now you ride with Whiteside. But if he can keep this up, you definitely ride with Whiteside. But if he ends up becoming just that mediocre guy, there's no reason to hang on to him in that contract. And I'm sure you can get a decent return on him on the trade market. Obviously, he could still be in a Jimmy Butler deal, but I don't think that's going to happen anymore. But we'll see as the season goes on how the Heat fare. Not going to look too much into this right now, but hey, they are bringing back the Miami Vice, which looks really cool. They brought back a black jersey now, and they're even bringing in a floor, and I thought that's pretty cool too. You can go look on their Twitter pages and Instagram. I'm sure it's all over. I mean, I know for a fact it's all over, and that's a good place to start. And speaking of awesome colors and awesome new things, the Marlins are bringing out a new logo finally after Derek Jeter has taken over the team from Jeffrey Loria. They've decided to go with a new logo. They haven't revealed it yet, but they're doing it in a very cool way. And they are releasing little bits of color here and there. They're releasing colorful pictures of the new colors, getting rid of the old color scheme of the blue, yellow, and orange, which I'm pretty happy about, I guess I could say. I was very hesitant at first. I liked the orange at times, but what they're coming out with, it seems a lot cleaner and a lot sleeker, and it looks a lot nicer. And on top of that, they're doing the ballpark renovations and all this stuff, so I expect when I go to a game next year that it will be a brand new atmosphere, and it will be a great place to watch a baseball game. So I think that's all I've got for you guys on this inaugural edition of the podcast. Just wanted to kind of get into it a little bit, into the swing of things, get the groundwork laid out now that you know what the show is all about, what I'm going to talk about. Obviously, I'm going to talk about different stuff every week, but I'm looking to keep things updated on not only here, but on Twitter and YouTube as well. Once again, that Twitter handle for you, it's kind of a long one, but hopefully you can remember. If you just search South to Central Florida Sports Report, you can probably find us there. But the Twitter handle is SO2, CEN for Central, FL for Florida, and Sports. SO2, CEN, FL, SPORTS. Or you could just follow me on my main account, which is a lot easier to find. It's Ken Landis39. That's my Twitter for both the show and my personal Twitter. Lots of good content on there. I'll try and keep it updated as much as possible. And other than that, that's pretty much it, guys. So hopefully, if you are listening and you want to give me some feedback, reach out to me on the Twitter sphere, and let me know also where you're listening. If you're listening on Spotify, YouTube, or iTunes. I don't think our iTunes will be up right away, but I'm trying to figure out how all this works, and I hope that you stick around for the journey with me. I think that's all, so I don't have anything else for you guys. Appreciate you tuning in to the first ever edition of the South to Central Florida Sports Report podcast, and stay tuned for more. And as mentioned, a busy week around the Orlando area with UCF sports, so hopefully you'll swing by to one of the events in the next 4 days. But until then, go Knights and charge on. Thanks for tuning in.